All right, good morning, everyone. Good morning. No, you're fine. You're fine. Good morning and welcome to our Committee of the Whole meeting on this Tuesday, May 24th. Commissioners, we do have quite a few items before us. Some of them include a presentation, and then after our action items, we have an executive session for a legal opinion, so I'll call for that right at the end, and I believe we're going down to the law library. So, and then we have public safety today at 3, and then we'll be back together tonight at 7. So we'll go ahead and get started with our first item. This is a resolution establishing our 2022 property tax millage rates. Can I get a motion?
Support.
All right, moved and supported. City Manager?
If we could, what I'd like to do as Mr. Sading comes and speaks to this item, our CFO is unable to be with us this morning, is to speak to the following 3, because I think they all support the adoption of the budget, both in revenue as well as potential uses of funds. And with that, I want to thank the staff for their work in advance doing these series of workshops and meetings that we've had. I believe it's like 5 in a row that we've had related to the budget. But with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Sading and have him provide an overview.
Thank you, City Manager. Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. Collectively, the first 3 items that you have on the agenda today will adopt the fiscal 23 budget, as well as provide the requisite funding for that budget, the necessary resources. The first 2 are resolutions. The first one establishing the 2022 property taxes, including the millage rates that will be effective come this July 1st. The second considers the fiscal 23 service provision fees. The majority of those fees become effective July 1st. And then the third item, we have the proposed FY 2023 budget ordinance. On May 3rd, the City Commission was presented with the City Manager's FY 2023 preliminary fiscal plan with appropriations totaling approximately $597 million. The City held a public hearing on Tuesday, May 17th for the purpose of receiving feedback concerning the proposed property tax millage, service provision fees, and the proposed FY 2023 budget. The City Commission has spent time over the past few weeks listening to presentations from City staff, questioning staff, and deliberating on the budget. Answers to previous Commission questions have been provided by staff over the past several weeks and posted online on the Budget Office site. Specific to the millage and property tax item, the 2022 proposed property tax millage was reduced approximately 2%. That said, the city did experience a slight increase in taxable value of approximately $4,500. The net result for the average city taxpayer is an increase of approximately $30 on their property tax bill. The city millage is levied on July 1st and is due by July 31st. Resolution number 2 is related to service provision fees. Fees with no recommended changes comprise approximately 63% of the total fees. An additional 20% of the fees reflect only a cost of living adjustment. Combined, approximately 83% have no change or only a cost of living adjustment. In terms of the budget ordinance, since the publication of the fiscal 23 preliminary fiscal plan, there have been a few changes to the city's, there's been one change to the city's personnel roster that occurred as part of the fiscal 22 fiscal year. That change has already been approved through budget amendment and resulted in the addition of 2 positions, bringing the total roster count to 1,665. This was for 2 justice analyst positions that are going to be added in the Oversight and Public Accountability Department and are 100% grant funded. Additional changes include the level of appropriation for the CDBG fund, which decreased by $55,793, and the home fund, which increased by $110,925. This is due to differences in anticipated federal awards and reprogramming of funds. That is a net increase of approximately $55,000. Overall, from the preliminary fiscal plan, the general fund increased by approximately $880,000. And in total, the citywide budget increased by approximately $847,000. The primary adjustments that I will point out are four. First, additional funding for the Third Ward Equity Fund. Second, funding for the African and Black Expo. Third, corridor economic recovery and public safety. And lastly, additional funding for emergency management within the fire department. That concludes my comments at this time, and the city manager is prepared to answer any additional questions that you may have. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So Commissioners, I think I'll take these one by one because we have to vote on them independently. So why don't we start with the resolution that's before us on the floor, the resolution establishing the property tax millage rates. Are there any questions or comments about that item? All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? It carries. All right, next is a resolution authorizing the 2023 service provision fees. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
All right, moved and supported. And as we heard, Commissioners, the vast majority of the fees are staying the same with no increase, and then there are some that are increasing at a moderate rate for cost of living. Any questions or comments about the fees? All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next we'll take us to the third item, and this is the fiscal year 2023 budget adoption with the proposed amendments that the city manager has made. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
All right, moved and supported. Commissioners, any questions or comments? I will start and just say to the city manager and the entire team, thanks for all your work on this. I appreciate all of the additional information provided in a timely manner as we peppered you with lots of questions and asked for additional information. I will also add that I think the budget book and presentation this year is probably one of the best that I've seen. I think how it was formatted and put together was very well done. So thank you for all of you who worked on our budget book for this year. And then thank you, City Manager, for listening and making some additional last-minute changes with additional funds to a number of important efforts in our city. So thank you for that. Commissioners, any questions or comments? Commissioner Lanier?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, City Manager, and to the entire staff for all of your hard work over the past probably 7 months of going down this path of the budget. I was looking at some of my notes from our discussions in the fall and spring, and then early spring, and then now here we are close to summer and about to adopt a budget. I just want to highlight a few things, if I may, about this budget that I'm appreciative of. And first, I think, to your point, Mayor, I'm grateful for the responses to the many questions that the commission presented and the thorough responses, even the responses to the recommendations that have come from the public in the last few weeks that I've been collecting and that I sent over to the chief and the city manager, that I wasn't necessarily expecting a response this quickly because there were so many. But I appreciate the time and effort that has gone into responding to those. Now I'd like to just highlight a few things. I think, it's important for the public to understand, city budgets. And I think even during public comment last week, someone asked a question about, help me to understand your agenda. And so I think, last time we had a public guide to the budget, and it would be great to have something similar. So once the budget is finalized, and it could just be a combination of the slides that we have here, just to summarize so that it's digestible for the public to read and understand. And then I'd like to just highlight my appreciation for the increase to the SAFE budget, SAFE Task Force budget, the Third Ward Equity Fund increase to $1 million. The fact that we are doing Grow 1000 again, that's very appreciative. And I think, whatever we can all do individually to make sure we get the 1,000 students and whatever relationships we have with businesses to get the employers as well. I think all hands on deck with this because it helps to keep our community safe during summer months when we have our youth engaging in something productive and positive. So I think we should all be taking full advantage of that. And tell me, are nonprofits eligible to participate on the business side of that too? Okay, yeah, so that's good to know. The bus shelters, I'm appreciative of that and the commitment of those getting done. The cure violence budgetary line item as well. The plan for acquisition of a building for the south end for the fire station in the 3rd Ward. The translation expansion and even responding to the question of what types of services or translation that we're providing through 311, and just to see that there's a need and the demand to be able to provide expansion there. There are a couple other, the Know Your Rights campaign, continuing to do that. The clean slate legislation and the appropriations for that. And even the partnership to continue with Grand Valley for the police academy, I think is another way for us to diversify our police force. And I'm glad that we're continuing to do that. So I'll just, and then the hot team expenditures as well. So I just wanted to highlight a few things. I am really grateful that that we have a budget that is reflective of a lot of the suggestions that have come from the community. And I know that there's a lot of work to be done to help the community to see that those recommendations that they've expressed are within this budget. And I know it's challenging to do that at times like these, but I thank you for even how accessible the information has been on the website, so that if people want to know what's been discussed, they can go to the website to be able to see all of the presentations and the responses to the questions. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I'll add, I appreciate you pointing those out, and I'll add a couple things. I appreciate your comment about how do we make the budget digestible, and I do remember, can't remember if it was last year or the year before, we had like a 5 or 6 minute video that we did. Do you remember that? I think it was Max France's voice, I think, actually. But it may be worthwhile to do some kind of visual like that again. I think that was really helpful. And then to highlight a few other things that all of those items that you highlighted are important ones. And typically, since I've been mayor at budget time, I talk about how no budget is perfect, and typically it's a give and take, and there are things that we'd like to see in it that we can't afford right now but are still on our list. But I have to say that this budget captures most, if not almost all, of the priorities that I have talked about and many of you have talked about around this table. And I'm going to highlight just a couple more that I am glad to see in this budget. I see our fire chief, the fire department cadet program, I think, is a really important addition to this budget, as well as our continued work to fund the eviction prevention program. We know how critical that is, especially as families continue to struggle with inflation. And then the work that we're doing around increasing our MLBEs and the Builders Exchange program. So if you look through this budget, I have a whole list of items highlighted that I'm glad that we're continuing, including the Neighborhood Match Fund. I think incredible projects have come out of that fund. And so if you look through the whole list of items, there's, I think, a lot of investments that will continue to see have a huge impact, not just on our neighborhoods, but on children and families who call Grand Rapids home. So thank you for that. Others who wish to be heard on the budget proposal, Commissioner Isasi and then Commissioner Ruppert, and then I'll come down here to Commissioner Jones and Commissioner Moody.
Thank you, Mayor. I too add my thanks to city staff and all the work that goes into this, and I hope that there's some rest following today and the weeks ahead. You know, I think we're certainly talking about a number of things on a local level, and Mayor and Commissioner Lanier, you highlighted a number of investments that were made. I too am supportive and appreciative of the amendments that have been made. I think just in the last couple of weeks as we looked at the just continued gun violence, so appreciate the chief having conversations about some of the things that he's looking at and connecting to, and I'll be anxious and ready to hear what he says as his 90-day review, 60-day review that he's going to do in July. But I also think it's important for us, we think on this local level, which we should, but I think there are a number of things that are happening in our global economy, and I don't think our city treasurer is in here at the moment. But in our fiscal committee, I think continuing to highlight the realities of our economy as we look at this global economy, all these geopolitical situations. We have large institutions warning that inflation is going to impact them by billions of dollars. You have large institutions that are laying off individuals, and we talked about that in our past commission meetings about appreciation of that. And so as I think forward, I think this budget is the best reflection of where we are in this moment. And we need to continue to recognize that we're probably going to have to be these economic first responders in the future, looking at our economy, looking at our recession, making sure that the investments that we receive are working the best for us. And so while that might not be the most exciting to think about as we adopt our local budget for this next fiscal year, I think it's something that we have to remain vigilant on, and I appreciate our city treasurer continuing to highlight that, because I think that is something that's certainly on the horizon, as well as the investment that you both mentioned about the emergency response pieces as we go into these months, thinking about some of those climate change, weather-related events that were happening on the east side of the state, and how do we make sure we are best prepared for them here on this and on our side of the state. So I think we've made those. I also think that there will probably be moments where we'll have to shift and to pivot to continue to advocate with other bodies of government. I think in government, there's a lot of shows about city government, right, that people think about when they put this umbrella of government. And while we are one body, it is going to be necessary for us to continue to advocate. I know that the county has a survey out there right now, and I would encourage, even though, again, that's not our work, encourage those who might be watching, our residents, to share their thoughts about how those relief dollars should be spent, because there are some investments that we could potentially maximize that are happening here at our city level, and to share that and to share those investments with those commissioners as well. I know the mayor reminded me of that, so I'll be sure to do that today. Lastly, I think that a number of the pieces are what can we make a financial investment in? And then also when I think back to some of the equity considerations, and I don't remember the number city manager, but that Ms. Stout shared about our city staff, thinking about how work could be restructured, reimagined. What is that new contract of city government with our constituencies? And I'm really appreciative to the staff for that continued thought process about how we should respond differently. How do we continue to respond in that strong customer service effort? So I'll be anxious to see, different surveys that we know we have out. Obviously, there's lots of work related to the master planning process and investments there. The participatory budgeting pieces, as well as continuing to overlay. I think I shared this in a couple meetings, and getting past this process is to continue to hear the feedback that we see from our 311 process or other ways that we receive information, so we can continue to use that data to help drive what these decisions are on an annual basis, but as we move throughout the year to make any appropriate and necessary budget changes. So thank you. I hope that you all take that time, appreciate one another, and look forward to voting on this budget in a few moments. Thanks.
Thanks, Commissioner. And Commissioner, I'll just echo what you said and remind folks there are two surveys out from the county right now. One is specific to your feedback on how you would like to see the county spend their ARPA dollars. And then there's another survey about county services and priorities. So I encourage folks to complete both surveys. Both give you an opportunity to talk about what services at the county are most important to you that you would like the county to invest in. So they're taking feedback now, and I encourage people to speak up. Commissioner Repart, and then Commissioner Jones.
Great, thanks, Mayor. I, too, will just say thanks to the staff, every last one of you. It's been 3 very, very intense weeks in a row, and a lot of back and forth, a lot of following up, and I will also echo that, like it was expressed in the mid-year update, for for us a little more reasonable pace for 2023. So I hope that people do get a break and are able to enjoy the summer after all of this work. The list of things that I wrote down that are included in this budget that I'm excited about is very long, so I'm not going to read them all. But I think that the thing, as I was reflecting on it, that I appreciate most is, and I think that for the people of Grand Rapids that we serve, is what's represented in this budget is things moving from concept to fully funded. So Cure Violence, we got to get started. We started by making an award. The homeless outreach team started with 4 people, and now it's fully funded and operationalized. The same is true for the Neighborhood Match Fund and the Neighborhood Summit. They started out as small ideas that have now taken up place in the budget. And the one that I'm most excited about, the biggest movement in this budget around public safety, is co-response and how important that is to the future of our city for public safety. So I'm thrilled by a lot of those movements. I'm encouraged by a 25% increase for neighborhood associations. In our CDBG funding, there's so much money available for affordable housing, going to Well House and community rebuilders and the Lexington School and WMCAT and new development and Link Up, and we're able to make all these investments. And so I'm thankful that we have this federal money right now to be able to do that. And I know that particularly as we looked at the out years of the budget, that we'll have some work to do to fully integrate those things into our operations. But for those who are looking at the budget and are not seeing the things that they maybe wanted to see, I guess my encouragement is that on our horizon list of topics from our last updates, those things are on the list for discussion. So similarly as those movements that I shared around Cure Violence, OPA started with a small budget, and now they're going to get a large increase this year. Those public safety investments and those climate justice investments are listed as explicit goals and horizon topics of the city. And so because of this budget and the investments that are in it, I have full faith that those things will come to fruition and also be able to be fully funded in our budget. So thank you to staff for working so hard. Thanks for being responsive to us and to the residents as well.
Thanks, Commissioner. And before I turn to Commissioner Jones, I'm just going to, again, thank you and Commissioner Lanier for all of the work you've done over the years on lead abatement. And I know we're all really excited to see the lead specialist position and the funding for lead paint remediation. So, Commissioner Jones?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, City Manager, and your staff for the work that has been put into creating the budget on this year. There's no doubt that I think all of us wish that we had a blank checkbook and that we could do much more. But I want to suggest that we are obviously, I think, moving in the right direction based on the current state with regards to some of the realities of what we have to spend, and probably the great uncertainty in terms of the future and our ability to spend money. And so kudos again for the work that you and your staff have embarked upon with this budget. I want to take a moment to also specifically say thank you for the investment around the corridor economic recovery and public safety in the Creston neighborhood. I say that because this is a neighborhood or community that I think clearly has the potential to soar, but they, like many other corridors, have felt the heavy burden or some of the harsh realities of going through COVID and the economy. And so I think that they will be very appreciative of that investment. And I also want to take an opportunity to also, even though it's not my ward, I want to say thank you for the increased investment in the Third Ward Equity Fund. Critically important that we continue to find ways to invest in a way that's very intentional, and also recognizing the need to operate with the greatest sense of targeted universalism. So thank you for that. Also, I want to close with just as we, I think, continue to go down the path of trying to find solutions to some very complex issues in our community, I'm very much wedded to the idea of, and I think we do that with this budget, wedded to the idea of focusing more and more on root cause when it comes to the issues that are at play in our community, especially in parts of our community where you have significant numbers of individuals or communities that consist of historically marginalized populations in our city, and the fact that we are, like I think any other city government, we're trying our best to try to address some things that have been at play for centuries and for decades, and it's not something that one organization or one institution can solve. But when I think of some of the root causes of everything from community violence to perhaps the increased presence of law enforcement, it's issues like poverty, high density / limited quality housing. It's poor educational outcomes, health disparities, limited opportunities, and no hope. And I want to suggest that all of those seem to equate, unfortunately, to a greater police presence. And it's not just here, it's any urban core that you go to throughout the country. And as I've said before, we're talking about layers of complexity that consist of systems and structures that have been in play for centuries and for decades. And so I know there's no magic solution. There's no one institution or organization that can address these on their own. But I do believe that this budget looks to address the things that we can control. And it's always interesting that the assumption that we, as a city commission, have the power to speak to educational outcomes. Well, we don't. That's in the hands of the folks over on Franklin Street with GRPS. But I think that we can do what we can do to engage in making it easier, perhaps, for GRPS and other educational institutions to be present and to help in getting better educational outcomes. Same thing goes for health disparities, right? I mean, I'm always reminded, City Manager, that in Austin, you all had your own health department in the city. We don't, right? And so there's the need to partner with our friends next door at the county around health disparities. And so we are, again, ultimately, I believe, doing what we can to address things like limited opportunities and trying to either restore or grow hope for those who call Grand Rapids proper home. And I'm just, again, hoping that we can continue down the path of leaning in and doing our part to address the root cause issues that I believe continue to get us the outcomes that we're getting, especially with regards to communities and neighborhoods that are populated by marginalized populations. So thank you again, City Manager, and I'm hopeful that we will get a unanimous support for the budget. So thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Moody, go ahead.
Yep, thank you, Madam Mayor. I want to take the opportunity to thank the city manager and the staff for the countless hours and days that you guys put into putting this budget together. I'm sure that there were days when you probably felt like throwing your hats out, your coats out, and getting to a point where you're saying enough is enough. I appreciate the fact that you allowed the community to have input as well, and the number of inputs that I saw on social media was very good, and the changes that you made to fit those changes for the community, I give you kudos for. I appreciate it. I also appreciate the fact that there is some more money coming to the third ward, which I'm kind of biased to the fact that the third ward isn't my ward. I want the third ward to take the opportunity to take advantage of what's coming, and as a community that we look at outside entities to also come into fruition to help us succeed as well. I don't think everything needs to be put on the city commission or the city manager or the mayor in terms of what the city can do. I think the community has a responsibility as well. And I think it's time this year with this budget that it opens up a door for us to be able to do much more. So I just want to say thank you, and I appreciate the work that this commission and that this city has done and this staff. And thank you.
Great, thanks, Commissioner. All right, so with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, Commissioners, next that will take us to our fiscal year 2023 DID budget in the amount, well, so I'll have Mr. Kelly come and tell us about the amount and what the funds will go towards. All right, moved and supported. Mr. Kelly, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Good morning, Commissioners. Yeah, so this item is a request to approve the resolution for the FY23 Downtown Improvement District budget in the amount of $1,349,614. You recall at your meeting back on May 10, you approved both the reauthorization plan and the resolution of necessity. This budget reflects the recommendations in that plan, as well as the conversations that we had throughout the reauthorization period. Comes recommended to you from the DID board, which reviewed it back on May 18th. And of course includes the provision for the core services of the DID, as well as the conversations that we had around resident-specific programs and projects, and also accounts for an increase in the budget for the downtown ambassadors. With that, be happy to take any questions.
Great, thanks. Commissioners, I'll add that we also talked about this with the overall budget for the Downtown Development Authority, and heard from a lot of folks who appreciated the services currently being provided, especially by the ambassadors, so thanks for that. Commissioners, any questions or comments? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, that will take us to our resolution approving the fiscal year 2023 Neighborhood Investment Plan, Home, ARP, and CDBG CV funding awards. Can I get a motion?
Support.
All right, moved and supported. We have Ms. Bohatch here to tell us about this, and as we heard, some of these numbers have been adjusted because we heard our final allocation numbers recently. So, Ms. Bohatch, you want to tell us about this?
Yes, thank you. Good morning. So we come to an end today of a really long process. As you know, we start way back in January and have a lot of required steps to get here. You've held your public comment period and your public hearing. And so now today we're asking you to approve final funding awards for our local projects. That is in an amount of just over $9.5 million of investment through the Community Development Block Grant, the Community Development Block Grant Coronavirus, Home Investment Partnerships, ARPA, Emergency Solutions Grants, and the Justice Assistance Grants Program. So you have a whole variety of funding sources wrapped up into that. You've talked about some of that big numbers in investment in your budget process as well. But again, this allows us to submit our annual action plan to the federal government that serves as the application for most of the resources that have been identified. And as Mayor Bliss, boy, that was a back in time. I've been here too long, huh?
Yeah, I don't mind being called Commissioner.
As Mayor Bliss indicates, we could not move forward until Congress had actually appropriated those funds. So the initial recommendations were provided to you were estimates based on our experience in the past. And we just received our allocations last week. So this is hot off the press, and we did have to make some adjustments. The Community Development Block Grant Program, we are seeing just over $110,000 increase, so that's good news. Our Home Investment Partnerships and Emergency Solutions Grants have slight reductions, small reductions, and so we have outlined for you in the memo some of those reductions that were required and increases. First and foremost, we adjusted the Community Development Department's administrative dollars in accordance with the caps for each of those programs, so increasing and decreasing appropriately. And then reductions related to home and ESG were applied to the Community Builders Tenant-Based Rental Assistance and Salvation Army Assistance, Long-Term Housing Assistance Program as well. There are increases for CDBG were applied to home repair services in the Grand Rapids Nehemiah project. That was provided primarily because there has been a significant need for access for residents of low and moderate income to make repairs to their homes, and that we can continue to see that as a growing need. And then finally, there's a non-monetary adjustment that was made in terms of the lead agency. HealthNet of West Michigan submitted as the applicant for the Gathered Online to End Homelessness project, which is a big collaborative of organizations doing work. And based on our recommendation of the funding to be used primarily for housing services and housing support services, and did not focus on the health care side of it. There was a request to have the lead agency changed to community builders. The partners in the project are in agreement to that as well. And so we're here today to ask you to make your final blessing on these so that we can get it submitted to HUD.
Mayor?
Great, thank you. City Manager?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I want to thank Ms. Bohaj for her work and leadership on this. And I asked her to provide some analysis of the aggregate impact on housing. And should you approve these awards today, the aggregate impact in fiscal year 23's budget would be 26, close to 27 million of funds that would assist housing services and unhoused weatherization programs. And so we were talking earlier about the collective fiscal impact. And so should you approve this morning, we will make sure we highlight that as part of the fiscal 23 budget.
Yeah. Thanks, City Manager. You were reading my mind. I was thinking that it's going to be incredibly important for us to get this information out to the community and let them know about these investments, and also let families know how they access these resources. So I'll trust you to connect with David Green to make that happen. And, you know, these allocations are in addition to the work that we want to do with the Affordable Housing Fund. And so I think that's important to know as well. Obviously, these funds are really important and these services are, but there's other work that we're doing around affordable housing, whether it's the Affordable Housing Fund, some of the changes we're making to zoning, and some of our other partnerships. And I see Ryan Kilpatrick is in the audience. I want to just thank him for his continued work around affordable housing as well. So, Commissioners, questions or comments? Commissioner Lanier?
Yes, I'd just like to echo the same sentiments that the city manager mentioned. And I want to highlight a couple of those agencies now, because I do think that for the millions of people watching, that it will be helpful to hear some of the agencies, because I think, you know, this is all part of the same discussion. You know, when people are coming forward and asking, where's the support, it's important for them to know where it is. So thank you for mentioning community rebuilders. For the rental assistance, the Salvation Army, the Grand Rapids Nehemiah project for home repair services for the same. And then the neighborhood associations and community organizations with some of the public safety. You know, so when people talk about policing yourselves and in the neighborhoods, you know, caring for one another through neighborhood associations, there are dollars that exist for that very thing, to be able to provide, you know, this engagement at the neighborhood level. And so Baxter Neighborhood Association, Creston Neighborhood Association, Disability Advocates for Housing Services, even the leadership and civic engagement with East Hills and Easttown. And, you know, I'm just naming a few of them. But I would say engage, you know, with your local neighborhood associations to see, you know, what work they're doing that you could be a part of in making a difference kind of at the local level. I think the Services for Family Outreach Center is another one that should be highlighted. Garfield Park, the Urban League and the homeless prevention work. So people who are in need, you know, reaching and connecting directly with them. The Drive for Success, that was another item that was on my list that, you know, the public was making a recommendation on, so that we can reduce the number of engagements that happen with drivers without licenses. So that's happening with Grand Rapids Youth Commonwealth. Habitat is on there. and a plethora of other organizations. And I just, again, to the earlier point, I don't know how we highlight them in a video or in other forms of communication, but I think it's important for people to know exactly where to go. And since, it's seeming like we're doing really well today, it would be great to even add some of the funding that comes from the county for similar services. So, if you have this need, you can go here or you can go there, because they too are allocating dollars as well. And so I think it just will help for the community to know what resources exist out there. That may be too soon to do for any communication we may be doing with the budget, but I think it's, again, helpful to be able to tell the full story of what's happening. And I'll just highlight one more, and that's Pine Rest with the Street Reach team. Again, engaging directly with the community and the citizens that exist in the community. Thank you.
Thanks for highlighting those. Commissioner Repart?
Yeah, you got one more? Go ahead.
I do. I'm sorry. In the Motown Square Affordable Assisted Living Project is a major one. A housing development, small developer, in partnership with Link Up. I'm so excited about that project, so that's another one to highlight. And let me stop.
I know, there's good ones. That's why we got to make sure that we're telling the story in a really multi-pronged way, because a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of these services or how much we're investing. Commissioner Repper?
Yeah, and I think that a part of the story is how far ahead of the curve we are, because what this shows is that especially when money becomes available above us at the state and federal, that we're ready to jump and put shovel-ready projects in front of them. And so very encouraged to see that the governor has announced a strategic plan around affordable housing. So has President Biden. As money gets attached to those kind of esoteric plans, we'll be ready to accept it. And so I'm excited about that. And I think that every time we demonstrate with these funds our ability to deliver, it puts us in a great position to receive those funds in the future. So Thank you, Ms. Bohach.
Yeah, well said. All right, any final comments? Commissioner Jones?
No, I just want to take a moment to thank Ms. Bohach. She was successful at what I would probably best refer to as herding cats in terms of the ability to pull myself and my colleagues together to assist in making this decision.
Yes, he was.
Yeah, it was lots of herding. And she made it happen. And I think that, this is the type of thing I wish that we could almost put in some sort of mailer or billboard or something, just to let the community know that, these are some of the dollars that are being spent to what my colleagues have said. This, I think, speaks to foresight in how we've invested. But also, as I just mentioned, it really leans in also around root cause, whether it's, affordable housing, or it's the work of the Fair Housing Center, or Habitat for Humanity. I mean, this is, again, trying to do our best to make the dollars that we have access to spread them as best as we can. And what I am most excited about is the ability to continue down the path of trying to take the dollars that we do have, and how can we use those dollars to garner further investment, right? How can we, because again, it won't, none of this will get solved by the city of Grand Rapids alone. It requires public and private and other funders to also put some skin in the game to try to address these very critical issues. So thank you for that. Appreciate you.
Yeah, leveraging funds
Madam
is
Mayor,
very critical. Go ahead,
there was
Commissioner
only
Woody.
one cat. The other was
We were all cats. We were, right, she was.
And thank you both for serving on this subcommittee.
Yeah.
Commissioner Isasi?
Because I had to recuse myself from that committee. So, and that's just my quick question to Ms. Bohach. I echo what my colleagues have said, but I had to recuse myself from that committee. Do I need to also recuse myself from this vote?
Not any longer.
Not any, because of what you just, okay, that's what I wanted to make sure.
Lead agency.
Thank you.
Thanks for checking.
And I will work with Mr. Green to make sure that we get something out into the community. And thanks for giving me a whole lot of credit, but I have a great staff in the Community Development Department. Aaron Banshoff and Joanna Schulte do a lot of heavy lifting in this process from January to the end. So thank you to them as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for your work. All right, with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, Commissioners, next that will take us to a resolution approving a new Class C redevelopment liquor license for Noodle Pig LLC. Can I get a
move it.
motion?
Support.
All right, moved and supported. This is a great new restaurant that will be opening over on North Monroe. This was approved at our last DDA meeting. City Clerk, anything to add?
Yeah, just one thing to bring, that we have reminders of, in the redevelopment liquor license, that law got updated to allow for any new construction in those redevelopments. So we had to do some interesting things to work with entities that wanted to go into a redevelopment district, but it had to be like existing buildings. And we worked tirelessly with some of the applicants to get these through, but they changed it so that it's new construction, which makes sense. If you're taking down a whole building to redevelop the area, that made sense. So I'm thankful for the legislature for getting that through. So this is one of those ones that's kind of one of those new construction redevelopment licenses.
Yeah, thank you. I know several of us have worked with local business owners who have struggled with that in the past, so I was glad to see this fixed at the state level. Commissioners, any final questions or comments? Commissioner?
I just wanted to say, I think this is, it's great to see this, another new restaurant coming over there. I think Mr. Wesley is excited about this project. We, of course, have new Spectrum Health building that will be over there. We'll get past this construction season. It'll be easier to get to some places. I know some of our businesses have just a challenge with that, but also obviously want the improvement. And I want to say thank you to Deirdre Deering who's the chair of our Monroe North Business Association for continuing to engage with new businesses who want to come and be on that corridor. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next that will take us to a resolution approving the request from Quarantinos for a new Class C redevelopment liquor license.
I'll move it.
Support.
All right, moved and supported. Commissioners, any questions or comments on this item?
I just want to say thank you, City Clerk, for making sure this was on our agenda.
Yeah.
It's obviously, Ms. Wetman and all the employees that work at a variety of establishments are very committed to the different neighborhoods that they're in, so I'm glad to see their continued growth.
Yeah, me too. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next that will take us to a social district permit recommendation resolution. Can I get a motion?
Support.
All right, moved and supported. City Clerk, you want to tell us about this item?
So there's two entities in this resolution. One is 77 Granville Incorporated, which is located at 77 Cesar East Chavez Avenue for Grand Woods Lodge. And the other one is for Tavern GR Incorporated, which is 100 Ionia Avenue Southwest, which is Dublin Hall. And they are both located in the downtown Grand Rapids Social District.
Great, thanks. Commissioners, any questions or comments? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next that will take us to a social district permit recommendation resolution for K-Rock LLC.
I'll move it.
All right, moved and supported. Commissioners, or City Clerk, anything to add on this?
Just once again, this one is in the, it's located at 218 Pearl Street, and it is in the downtown social district.
All right. And I think we all should go there and do karaoke some night with our city manager. Reserve one of the rooms. Be quite fun. All right, any?
Can he sing?
He can sing. Yeah. It's a hidden talent, All right. Any questions or comments? All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed? It carries. All right, next that will take us to a resolution amending City Commission Policy 900-44, which is related to the acquisition of tax foreclosed properties. Can I get a motion?
So move it.
Support.
All right, moved and supported. And Commissioners, I do believe we have a presentation on this item and the next. Is that right, Jono? Okay.
That is correct, thank you. There he is. I'm going to be joined by Mr. Ryan Kilpatrick for part of this presentation as well, City's Housing Practice Leader. Not joining me, but also a significant contributor to getting here today is Ms. Erin Banshaw from the City's Community Development Department, who provided a lot of her expertise from the work that they do in community development. So this presentation will relate to both of the next items on your agenda, and they're both related to real estate policies. So the first one we'll go through is a consolidated property disposition policy. This is a consolidation of 3 existing policies, so it is a new one. We'll get into the details of that. The second policy is an amendment to an existing City Commission Policy 944 related to the acquisition of tax foreclosed properties. So starting with the property disposition policy, what we're doing is streamlining and consolidating the 3 policies listed here. We had separate policies for disposing of residential and non-residential policy. 70 to 80% of the language in those 2 policies was trying to be the same, maybe not exact, but trying to accomplish the same thing. So Mr. Kilpatrick went through a real heavy lift to get that right. And then also this 927, which is related to good faith deposits on bid proposals. Everything that was in these policies that was worth keeping is in the new policy as well. So for highlights here, I'll talk about some things that remain and aren't significantly changed. The classification of properties by the current status, so whether it's residential, non-residential, vacant or improved, buildable, non-buildable, et cetera. The priorities we have for the properties based on their classification is not significantly changed. The process for preparing property for disposal is not significantly changed, very much the same as what we had before. Now we'll get into some new things, some clarifications and additions. Affordable housing was never defined in the policy, and so we are defining that here. As you'll see, that means at or below 80% of AMI if it's a home ownership project, 60% AMI if it's a rental project, and not noted, but that requirement would be for a minimum of 5 years as well. That's defined in the policy. We talk about the permissible methods for disposing of property depending on the goals. I'm going to spend a little bit of time in detail on that. For non-residential property, we are not making any changes. The changes are specific to the residential property. So think of the property that the State Land Bank Authority is holding for us. And then a couple cleanup items based on our experience with these properties over the years. So this policy now guides us in that if there's a project proposed that we accept the proposal and want to move forward, we will not convey the property until the project is ready to commence. This will avoid situations that have happened from time to time where we convey a property, the project doesn't happen, and we find ourselves in an awkward situation. So we will provide an option agreement that will allow an applicant to go get their financing, their land and land use approvals, et cetera. The policy also states that we would not sell a property to a proposed purchaser if they had an alternative property that could be used for the same project. The policy now provides for third-party administration. Think about the State Land Bank Authority, who we have an agreement with, who can effectively implement parts of this for us. So if the obligations are defined in a separate agreement, we can rely upon a third party. That would be the State Land Bank at the outset here. And then finally, where excess proceeds of sale were previously directed to the Property Management Fund, now that we have an affordable housing fund, the excess proceeds would go there instead. So all expenses will be repaid. Nobody will be losing money, but any excess money would go to the affordable housing fund. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide because, as I said, related to non-residential property, our priorities have not changed and the permissible methods of sale listed there have not changed either. So there's very much verbatim what was in the non-residential policy previously. I will spend more time on the residential property, so think of generally single-family lots, but could be properties that could hold 2, 3, or 4 residential units as well, would be a residential property. Priorities not significantly changed. What we're talking about changing is the process for listing these properties for sale. So if this policy is adopted, all of the property that we currently own that would be classified as residential would be available for sale at all times. For the first 6 months that a property would be available for sale, it will be available for sale as it is today, meaning to qualified nonprofit organizations for affordable housing projects. That's been true with 60 properties that the State Land Bank owns right now. It's been true for the last 20 months, and that's what we would recommend being true for newly acquired properties for 6 months. After 6 months, the requirement that the purchaser be a nonprofit organization would go away. And so the affordable housing requirement would remain, but it would be possible for a new organization, an individual, somebody looking to purchase a property for their own home to buy a property from the city. That would be true for the next 6 months. After a year, so think of annual funding cycles, right? There would be an opportunity for every annual funding cycle to come and go. A property would be available to anybody for any purpose. That being said, of course, we would still have priorities. So if multiple proposals are submitted, we would prioritize City of Grand Rapids residents. We would prioritize home ownership over rental. We would prioritize emerging or first-time developers. We would still prioritize affordable housing, but a property could be sold for a market rate development at that point. At this point, given what I just described, that 0 to 6 months, 6 to 12 month, and thereafter policy recommendation, and the fact that, as I also said, all of the property the land bank owns currently has been available to nonprofits for the last 20 months, we look to Mr. Kilpatrick for a recommendation on how to sort of roll this policy out, given that there's a rolling release of these properties. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Kilpatrick at this point.
Thanks, Jono.
Hi,
Good morning.
welcome.
Thank you. So as Jono has discussed, we've taken a look at all of the properties that are currently held and being managed by the Michigan Land Bank Authority, and really tried to evaluate where do we have parcels that should be a priority for long-term preservation, or at least a bit longer-term preservation, to try to ensure we're maintaining that affordability requirement going forward as our top priority. And then where do we have properties where we have an opportunity to release those to the private market? Really in thinking through how many parcels does the city currently own and pay to be managed over time. There is a cost to continue to manage these properties over time, just in terms of long-term maintenance. But there's also a cost to our housing market of continuing to keep vacant property on the sidelines. Having that 20-month period of time available to nonprofit developers for affordable housing, seeing that we can't move those properties quickly enough in that sector, we did want to make at least some of these properties available to the private sector in the short term. And so what I want to do is give you an illustration of how we've looked at these properties and talk a little bit about our filtering mechanism. One of the primary components was evaluating the number of vacant parcels surrounding the land bank owned parcels today. So what we wanted to do is evaluate, is this a unique lot in this particular neighborhood that otherwise wouldn't be available to the private sector? Or is it one of many vacant lots in the neighborhood? The other thing we wanted to look at is how much income restricted affordable housing currently exists in the immediate surrounding neighborhood, and how much just traditional market rate currently exists. So what you'll see here is those green dots are the parcels that we're recommending be released to the private market upon adoption of this policy. Those green dots are locations where we have a significant number of other vacant lots that are not owned by the Land Bank Authority, as well as a significant number of income restricted and affordable units in that neighborhood. So you'll see a majority of those green dots are either on or adjacent to the South Division corridor, south of Franklin, or on the southwest side. We do have a couple of parcels that are intermixed with that concentration of red. And I'll talk about those in just a second. So again, to reiterate, a majority of our green parcels that we're recommending for release are in neighborhoods where we have a lot of other vacant parcels. And so releasing those land bank owned parcels doesn't create a mismatch in the marketplace. What it does is it says we've got a number of vacant parcels that are available. Some of them are held by ICCF, some are held by community rebuilders or the Grand Rapids Housing Commission. Many are owned by private entities, an LLC that maybe owns the home next door or the auto repair facility next door. When we look at those red dots, we really felt like it was important not to release those to the private market yet, because those are neighborhoods where we don't have a significant number of vacant lots, and we don't have a significant number of income restricted and affordable units in those neighborhoods. So what we haven't been able to do is get a decent amount of LIHTC or Grand Rapids Housing Commission housing units long-term preserved in those neighborhoods. And so those are going to continue to be neighborhoods where we want to prioritize affordability for as long as we can. And that's going to be not just through these vacant lots, but also in partnership with our nonprofit developers and for-profit developers through the LIHTC program. The other element of those neighborhoods where you see the concentration of red dots is those are the neighborhoods that are most at risk of gentrification right now. What we're seeing in terms of investment patterns is more and more investors buying properties in those neighborhoods, keeping them as rental units for longer, but not with income restrictions. And so what we want to ensure is that those properties with the red dot have every opportunity to be available, first as a property that is owned and redeveloped by a nonprofit developer, and then second as a property that is really prioritized for affordability, because we haven't been able to preserve enough affordability in those neighborhoods as of yet. As I mentioned, there are 3 or 4 green dots that are kind of in the midst of that concentration of red dots. Those parcels are frankly non-regular shaped parcels for the most part. So it could be a triangle piece of property that isn't of a dimensional standard that I think it's going to be super easy to develop that particular piece of property. We've seen already that our nonprofit developers are challenged just by the cost of construction. And so layering in a difficult piece of property to redevelop that has already been available for the last 20 months, we felt like those handful of parcels could be made available. And I think I'm going to pass it back to Jono for this last slide.
Thank you, Ryan. So I'll go into the second policy here. And again, this is an amendment to an existing policy, 900-44. So each year we work with the Kent County Treasurer to acquire tax foreclosed properties and make them available pursuant to the policy we just discussed. There's a history to this policy. It was adopted in 2002 after Kent County became the foreclosing governmental unit. You may be familiar, sort of the process. The role we played at that time was we would get a list of tax foreclosed properties. We'd send it to city departments to determine whether anybody wanted to build a road or add to a park or something like that. And we also provided it to our nonprofit housing developers. They would let us know whether they wanted a property. We would acquire it, convey it to them. Everything else would generally go to tax foreclosed property auction. 2013, that policy was amended, and maybe it makes sense why we did that on this next slide here. So 2013, the foreclosure crisis, right, coming out of the financial crisis, 2008, 9, 10, property takes 3 years to become tax foreclosed. We acquired 162 tax foreclosed properties in 2013. Policy was amended at that time. The role we played then was to acquire all of the tax foreclosed properties, convey all of them to the Kent County Land Bank Authority, and they would then in turn work with the nonprofit housing developers as we did previously, but then just generally work to get those properties back into productive use otherwise. Time went on. You can see the number dropping pretty precipitously there. Obviously, the Kent County Land Bank Authority no longer exists. We have a relationship with the State Land Bank Authority. So things have changed pretty significantly over time, which is why we're here with an amended policy. What we're recommending here is this policy as written today, not being proposed, but as currently is approved, is a policy that talks about the acquisition and disposition of tax foreclosed properties. What we're recommending is just an acquisition policy. The policy we talked about at the outset would be the disposition policy for tax foreclosed properties. So we're only talking about acquisition. We are making changes to align with new partners, the State Land Bank Authority. We are making changes to align with the Michigan Supreme Court decision and subsequent changes to state law that change potentially what we have to pay to acquire tax foreclosed property. Historically, we would always acquire for what's known as the minimum bid, being the past due taxes, fines, and fees, generally a very much below market rate cost. In certain circumstances now, depending upon the actions of the previous owner, we may have to pay fair market value. That can mean the difference between $10,000 and $150,000 for a property, which is a big difference. We obviously have budget constraints to operate within. And so if this policy is adopted, what city staff will do is attempt to acquire as many tax foreclosed properties every year as we can that are buildable or already improved. So we will not be acquiring side lots, right, 5-foot wide pieces of property. We will not acquire property if it's occupied unless there's a third-party service provider identified in the future. Property can be acquired for the minimum bid or something similar, that very much below market rate cost. And then it provides discretion to staff to sort of maximize the amount of property we can acquire each year within the budget constraints that we have. And then the properties, once acquired, would be sold pursuant to the first policy that we just discussed under that 6 months, 12-month program. So to summarize, if both of these policies are adopted today, we would continue to purchase tax foreclosed property for as a resource for housing development with a priority on affordable housing development. We'd standardize and create clarity between currently existing policies. All property would be available for 12 months for affordable housing. It would provide a pathway for less experienced developers to access the property resource that the city has. And it would, over time, reduce the ongoing maintenance costs, which have been about $70,000 a year. That is the end, and we'd be happy to take any questions.
Good to see this come forward. It's probably long overdue. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Thank you, City Clerk. Thank you for bringing this forward. I'm sure it's taken a few months to bring it forward and is long overdue, so thank you for that. Commissioners, questions? Commissioner Lanier, then Commissioner Repart, and then Commissioner Murphy.
Thank you so much, Jono, for the presentation, the thorough presentation. And I know we've been having some conversations for a number of years about increasing the opportunity for individuals to be able to purchase foreclosed property. So I feel like this is an attempt to do that. I have a few questions, and thank you, Ryan, as well, for your participation in the presentation. I have a few questions. I think your presentation today helps to provide a little bit more context. As I was reading through the memo, I had a ton of questions, but your presentation helps to answer that. But it also poses a whole nother set of questions that I have, which makes me uncomfortable with making a vote today after hearing it. So I'll provide that context as I'm asking the questions. I think that the order in which on slide 5, we are, attempting to make the properties available. I think that if the affordable housing developers are slowing down their interest, and it's likely because of the number of larger scale projects that many of them are embarking on. I'm wondering if the order could be changed so that the ownership piece could go first. So those who may be acquiring the property for their principal residence, if that would be the first line, and then go to the nonprofit developers, and then anyone for affordable housing, which I'm assuming at that point could be individual, landlords could come in at that point. So that would be a recommendation that I would have, is to increase the opportunities for those who may have an interest in purchasing a home for their personal residence. I think the other piece to that is because individuals may have less access to the materials that a nonprofit developer would have. And so, to have the homes that are most suitable, by the time it gets to the individual, the homes they're going to need a lot more work than those at the beginning of the stage, right? Of these stages. So I would say start with allowing them to purchase the homes at the beginning, because there's less work for them to do. The other thing is I'd like to add a component. We have actually a policy in place for city staff who may have interest in living in the city of Grand Rapids, and I'd like to add a component that includes city staff who may have interest. I know specifically, there have been, calls for the police department, and I know there's a program that exists there. So this might be another way to incentivize our officers to live within the city. The other question or comment that I have is, I'm curious to know what the status is on the city of Grand Rapids having its own land bank. I know that's been a question that we've been kind of mulling around, so I'm curious on an update for that. And then the other comment is on slide 7. I think I'd like to see the 35 properties to be a part of those that are released. If I'm understanding the presentation, the nonprofits have already had 20 months to decide if they want them. And Dr. Maya Angelou has a quote that says, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. Well, they've showed us that they have no interest in them. Let's believe them and let's release them so that we can get more, because that's the majority of the properties, because we only have 60. So I would say let's add those 35 to the list to be released as well. And the slide 9 is a positive slide to see that, there's a reduction of foreclosed properties. That says a lot about, the region and our community. I just like to, highlight that. And then I need a little bit of help understanding the Michigan Supreme Court decision, and that the piece that you were mentioning about the dollar amount that the properties could be acquired, because that ultimately will impact how they are sold. And I'll just end with, I think when it's time to engage individuals with these properties, it would be good to use the same methodology that the Kent County Land Bank had when they were ready to publish their list, but then narrow it even further maybe to target those who may have Section 8 vouchers, who are home ownership ready or eligible, or, connect with the Community Development Department with some of the programs that they have to kind of match those people who may be getting down payment assistance to this program. I think Commissioner Isasi does a really good job at reminding us to connect all of our dots, and I think this would be a way to narrow the crowd down a bit. So my questions and comments. Thank you.
Questions. I'll let both of you jump in. I guess I can start with the legislative piece. It hasn't moved out of land. It's in committee right now, and it hasn't moved probably for a number of reasons, but we continue to advocate to get that legislation passed, but it's just, as of right now, not moving.
And why can't we in the city of Detroit can? Remind me of what the difference is?
Yeah, the current legislation to allow cities to have their own land bank is based on population. So the
Okay, so
amendment
because of
that
our
we're trying to
size.
push is actually twofold for cities that are in a county that doesn't have a county land bank, and cities, I believe they lowered it down to 50,000 in population.
Okay.
And so that's what we're working to.
What's the current population now, like 500,000 or something?
For Detroit, it's like 500,000, and we don't qualify under the current language.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Lou? I'm looking at Lou to see if I missed anything. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay,
Donna and
I
Ryan.
think I wrote them all down, so help me if I miss anything. So your first comment was whether we could prioritize homeownership over, as sort of a first priority before the nonprofits. The reason that the property would be available to nonprofits for the first 6 months is that the nonprofits have access to certain financial resources that wouldn't be available to an individual to access. I also need, I think an overarching point of clarification for kind of all of this, the answers I'm going to provide, is that of the 60 properties that the State Land Bank owns on our behalf, 2 or 3 of them have homes on them, and they're in a state of very significant disrepair, debatable whether they can be saved or not, right? And so we're mostly talking about vacant lots, and that has historically been true. So your second, so the rationale for prioritizing nonprofits when a new property becomes available is that they would have access to the sort of annual funding cycles from community development or from Kent County that would make it possible to undertake what's generally going to be a pretty extensive renovation on the order of $150,000 to $200,000, or construction of a new home, which is also very expensive right now, and is not going to make a lot of sense in the private marketplace. The second question was,
Before you go to the second one.
yes,
So then my comment that if we continue to wait, by the time they get even worse, the longer we wait. And so if we don't think that individuals can afford them, or we're making a lot of assumptions. And I think because of the housing market, I think people are in a different financial position to potentially be able to afford and renovate homes, and may even want to live in them while they're renovating once they get them to a certain standard. But I think the longer we wait, the worse off they'll be. So when we finally dangle the homes in front of them, we're saying they're even worse than the other ones. So I think your point is proving my point that we should probably start with them when it's more likely that they would be able to afford them than when they're in further disrepair, or the options are, even more challenging to renovate or remediate, whatever the right word is for them.
Commissioner, I think, as Jono said earlier, in terms of the tools the developers have, would you have the same perspective if we had time to determine how we would use our affordable housing fund, and to see if the that fund board, which is beginning to stand up, would have an interest in subsidizing some of the elements that would help to create more affordability in those homes that are banked before they're just released before they're released.
Absolutely.
And that's a conversation we haven't had at this point. So I hear what you're saying in terms of getting the development occurring, but if there's a possibility where the Affordable Housing Fund could help to encourage multifamily development, and possibly with some home ownership, that could help prior to making the decision to release all those properties.
Yeah,
Good point.
that would help.
okay. Just to be clear, the 60 properties that we have right now, there are no properties in there that anybody should be living in currently. They're in a pretty significant state of disrepair.
Okay.
The question as to whether city staff could access these, I suppose we could have that conversation. They would be a member of the general public, and we would, as stated in one of these slides, our priority would still be for local ownership. So that is defined sort of on a neighborhood first, and then city next, and then county, and then outside of the county would not be a local ownership. So that's specifically stated in the policy. So that would fit within the priorities as they are stated. Should we release all of the properties? I think we went through that. I think also to provide context here of how this would work, right? We're in a state right now where we have a number of properties that we've amassed over a number of years, right? With Kent County Land Bank going away, the state land bank picked up everything that they had, which was what we had transferred to Kent County over a number of years. Going forward, right, so we're going to make a recommendation to you next month to acquire tax foreclosed properties. That's going to add 4 or 5 properties to this, right? And so this initial sort of rollout is going to be the big push of 25 properties become available now, 35 are still reserved. But after a year from now, almost everything's going to be available except for a handful of properties that we acquire every year through tax foreclosure. We don't expect that we will be adding 20, 30, 40 properties in the short term, right? So what this recommendation is important, and also sort of the biggest shift in what would happen even as we look forward into the future, where we would just have a handful of properties every year. You asked about the Michigan Supreme Court decision.
Yeah.
There was, the claim that was made and upheld was that those who lost their homes to tax foreclosure had a right to the excess proceeds when a foreclosing governmental unit, whether that be a county or the state, would turn around and sell property at an auction. The claim was that the person who lost their property should be entitled to any profit that was made. They would call it profit. A county may say that's what we need to run our program, but the Supreme Court decided that that was in fact true, and so state law was changed that now provides a process for an individual who has lost a home to tax foreclosure to file a notice of claim with the foreclosing governmental unit. And if they do that, there are things that have to happen that are outside of our control nor our responsibility. But what that does to us, to the city, is that if we want to acquire a property under our right of first refusal, we are required to pay fair market value for that property. We are not permitted to buy it for the minimum bid. We have to pay the greater of fair market value or the minimum bid. So by filing that notice, that drives the cost of a property up for us generally.
So that happens with every property, or those when the owner filed the notice?
Only when they file a notice before July 1st.
So then we would know not to purchase those, or know that if we were to purchase them, that they would be at market value?
Correct. So last year, and we did this, and we will do this again next month, we will bring a list to you for conditional approval, because it will have to be before July 1.
I see.
So if there's a claim filed before July 1, and that drives the price of the property up, we may not acquire it. In some instances, the fair market value of a vacant lot is very close to the minimum bid, and so it doesn't matter much. So if a price is $5,000 instead of $4,000 for a vacant lot, we probably will still acquire it. But if a property is now $150,000 instead of $15,000, we probably will not acquire it.
And I know this is going to sound like it's to our disadvantage, but I do think that helping to make sure that the public is aware of this file notice of claim is available to them helps our community. And and so whatever way, we can make sure that we're communicating that, because those who have lost their homes are suffering in some way, shape, or form, and to be able to file this notice of claim to be able to get some revenue, I think is to our advantage for the community member, though it may not be for the acquisition of those homes. So I just wanted to mention that should also be kind of a part of some of our promotion about housing and what we're doing in the city. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mayor, if I could, I think I recall when we started revisiting this topic, and some of it evolved around housing development and the other part around helping people to maintain or stay in their homes. And so I agree with your comments, Commissioner, in terms of providing both education on how people can stay in their home and what should happen if foreclosure did have to occur. I do want to also say to your earlier comment about the city staff having opportunities to further locate or relocate in the city. I do support that, and I'll ask Deputy City Manager Behrens to see how our current employer assistance policy regarding home ownership could apply to these tax foreclosed properties as well.
Yeah, and to be clear, that provision for a previous property owner to file a claim does not stop the foreclosure process. It has no impact on that, and it accrues to the owner. There's very infrequently an owner-occupied property that becomes tax foreclosed. They are generally not owner-occupied properties.
Yeah, I think the program that the city manager was speaking of was through the Third Ward Equity Fund. But so on the front end, there's a program to prevent it from happening. But in the event that it does happen, being able to provide them with a tool to let them know that they potentially could be, they could receive the proceeds is going to be helpful for those people who have gone through the foreclosure process. Thank you for making that clarification, though.
Yeah, and then the last thing, I think you asked how we could make sure that the public was aware of what we're doing. I think what we envision currently is the State Land Bank is well situated to be the lister of these properties, right? They have a very well-defined process and website, but we would supplement that with our own communications and website that directs people there, explains the policy, explains the timeline and what's required in order to access these.
Yeah, and I would think to the point I was making is, engage with those same providers we were just talking about in an earlier agenda item that are helping people, rental assistance, all these other programs that we're funding in other ways to help them to know that this opportunity exists. Really targeting those who we know are in need of support. Thank you.
All right, I saw a few other hands up. Let's go. Commissioner Moody, did you have your hand up? And then Commissioner Rappert.
I did, Madam Mayor, but thank you, Jono, for your response to Commissioner Lanier's question. I had a question I was going to ask in reference to the estimated value of the property. You've already answered that question, so thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Rappert?
Yeah, thanks. I've been looking forward to this update, so I appreciate all the work that's went into this and appreciate the balance of trying to figure out how we can move these along, because we've had this list in our hands for a long time, and I appreciate the thoughtfulness in terms of the recommendations of which ones to maybe move forward a little bit quicker than others. I had two questions. The first was how many we're going to get in 2022, which sounds like 4 or 5 maybe, but the second one is really related to, it's kind of getting at what Commissioner Lanier was touching on is, yes, these have been available for nonprofits for 20 months, but to some degree they were waiting to see this. And also we updated our vacant lot policy and these other kind of things. So do we know that there's perhaps renewed interest from nonprofits now that they have a little bit more certainty in terms of what could become available to them?
There is interest out there in a handful of properties for sure. I think it's also important to note that it's not as if nothing has happened. We have sold 9 properties, plus there were some others that we never transferred to the State Land Bank because we knew they were going to be acquired. So there's probably 12 properties over the last 20 months that we have sold to nonprofits for redevelopment projects. There has been interest. I think what we were really looking forward to was trying to get into policy that process where we wouldn't convey property, but we would provide an option on property to allow the development to get financed and get permitted, et cetera, rather than just conveying property at the outset and hoping that the projects that were proposed could become funded and developed. So are the nonprofits waiting to acquire all 60 of these properties immediately upon adoption? Certainly not. Are there a handful or maybe a dozen that there is interest in? Yes, there are.
Great, thanks. Any other questions? All right, so Commissioners, so just to be clear, I know that the presentation included a summary of both the acquisition policy changes and the disposition, but those are separate resolutions before us. So the one before us for vote, even though the presentation included both, is the resolution amending the policy for the acquisition of the properties. So do you have any additional questions or comments specifically about the acquisition changes?
I do. Well, I just want to make sure that the point that the city manager, I think this was in the disposition, but that piece is noted about the housing fund, because I think without that step, I'm struggling with hearing so much information that I think is, extremely important and making a decision. We've tried to have these discussions and then have the vote the next time, so that, those of us who may want to do a little bit of homework and have some more conversations would have time to do that. And this presentation is filled with more information than the memo, so I need some assurances that that's going to be a part of it. So I'm sorry to delay, Mayor, but I'm just trying to make sure I have the right order.
Yep, no, I think that's a good distinction. I do think it's a little confusing with both of them being combined together. The element you talked about, though, is related to the disposition, not the acquisition. And so the acquisition component is really just about how we acquire the tax foreclosed properties and how we do it in a way that is aligned with the changes from the Michigan Supreme Court decision, as well as from the county foreclosed properties.
So those last 4 slides?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very separate. Again, the existing policy relates to the Kent County Land Bank Authority, and so really doesn't make any sense we've asked you to waive that policy the last couple of years.
Yeah, so this will remove that language because the land bank doesn't exist anymore.
Thank you.
So any specific questions about the acquisition changes? Okay, so all those in favor of the resolution approving the amendments to the policy related to acquisition, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, then it'll take us to the disposition, and that's where I think, Commissioner, a lot of your questions were related to, all good questions, particularly the one around how do we potentially use this as we get the affordable housing fund off the ground, make sure that those are working closely together to ensure affordability, as well as support city employees to live in the city. So City Manager, do you want to speak to that? Are you comfortable moving forward, or would you like this to come back?
Well, I see it's a resolution for a public hearing, so I think that does change it a little bit. If I'm reading I think it was the vote for something is what threw me with it all being couched together, but if the disposition portion is all within this public hearing, that gives us time to do exactly what I'm requesting. Am I reading that accurately?
No, the resolution before you would rescind the 3 policies that would be consolidated and approving the new policy as presented.
Why don't I read it and get it on the floor?
Oh, you're at 11. I was on 12. I'm sorry. I looked at the wrong, then I'm, okay.
So why don't
Back to where I
I
was.
read this and get a motion, get it on the floor, and then I'll let City Manager respond. So this is a resolution adopting City Commission Policy 900-63, disposition of city-owned property. Can I get a motion?
Support.
All right, moved and supported. So City Manager, do you want to respond to some of the concerns you
I'm
heard?
wondering, I'm wondering if we made an amendment in the resolve section and kind of acknowledge how our intent would be to work with the Affordable Housing Fund and encourage that ensure that there's a review or incentives that are discussed before we dispose of the property ultimately just for individual purchase.
So do we need to add that, or can it just be clear that that's the intent with those additional properties, that would be in partnership with the Affordable Housing Fund?
And I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it should be explicitly added somewhere, because I think, that's how things may not get done if it isn't explicit.
Okay.
So in the steps that are outlined on slide 5 is where it says process for listing and sale is around where I think that portion about the housing fund could be added at the beginning step.
Okay. City Manager?
I don't see any concerns about inclusion. We have to work on the language. I'm looking at John and Mr. Kilpatrick. Any thoughts? I see Mr. Kilpatrick nodding.
And it's specifically to 900-63.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, I think the point that's been made is that there are likely to be additional
mic on?
resources available.
Is your mic on?
Yeah, I think so. The important point is there are likely to be additional resources available for those 35 properties that we recommend being held, both from the city's Affordable Housing Fund as well as from the state housing plan, potentially from the federal government. And so really thinking about how do we strategically ensure that we're working towards equitable outcomes in every neighborhood as we think about the release of these properties. But I think as long as the language in the resolution reflects that, we're going to continue to focus on those priorities going forward. Over the next 3, 4, 5, 6 months, we'll have a number of additional funding sources that will become more clear to us, and how they do or do not relate to the potential redevelopment of those 35 parcels.
Could we request that before those 35 parcels move forward, that the disposition of those 35 come back with, because you're absolutely right, there's going to be funds made available at the federal level and the state level that may also be able to be used for these properties. So could we have, before those move, could we have something come back before this body where it's clear that resources from our local affordable housing fund or the state or the federal government or even some of our philanthropic partners are going to be used for the disposition of those properties to ensure affordability?
Yes. Do you want to ensure that those additional 35 parcels are held in perpetuity until we've resolved that, or just for the, because I think right now we're just holding those 35 for another 6 months.
Yeah, I'd like to see them. I'd like to see that come back in 6 months.
Yeah, and I think we're talking about two different things. I think in the memo, 900-63 is for the 25. And so I think we're talking about two sets of properties here. And I think what I'm saying is even for the 25, I'd like the first step to include this kind of ownership piece in conjunction with the Affordable Housing Fund.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm pulling those two together and,
Yeah.
and
I
we need to
think-
keep them separate. Okay.
Yeah, and I think when the 35 are eligible, then they too
That
should
can-
follow the same suit.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get in the steps that are outlined on slide 5, that component. And I think you're right, City Manager, in utilizing the resources that exist through the Housing Fund is a way of addressing that, because the challenge I think I heard Jono mention is that individuals may not have the resources to do all that's needed. And that may be a way of providing that. Sorry, Katie.
Yeah,
you were gonna
no,
add anything?
Confirming, as you said, Commissioner Lanier, the current resolution in front of the commission does not address the second tranche, the 35 properties.
Yeah.
So there would be no modification and we can take your direction to coordinate with respect to those before they would come back to you. The resolution in front of you does authorize release of the 25 properties.
So if the staff isn't ready to make a decision, could we remove this portion until there's further conversation about how to implement the suggestion?
Are there any timing implications of this?
No, there's nothing immediate.
Okay, so we can bring this
Correct.
item.
You could either bring back a revised resolution that takes the 25 out, or you could remove that section 4 of the resolution and adopt the policy as is today.
Okay.
Yeah, and because I think I need a little bit more discussion, because I don't know if I'm ready to jump home ownership up to the first thing, unless it's somehow affordable home ownership. You know, I think that the first one is in there, the first two are in there to preserve affordability, and then it kind of goes to the market. And so if we're going to bump it up to the first, I would want there to be some sort of stipulation that we're still aiming for affordable homeownership. But
That's
if it's a
right.
vacant lot and they're building brand new, it's going to be pretty tricky to accommodate that unless they're working with a nonprofit housing developer. So that's the part that I don't know if I'm prepared to make that quick shift unless we can ensure that affordability part of it.
Sounds like we need more time on this. So how about, should I table or withdraw? Should we just withdraw it? Okay, so city attorney says we should just, so can I get a motion to withdraw this to give,
Need a motion withdraw, whoever made the motion.
The person who made the motion withdraws their
yeah,
motion.
so who is it, was that Commissioner Jones?
I believe so.
Commissioner Jones, you want to withdraw your
I don't
motion?
think I did, but I will. I'll
Who
withdraw.
do you
City
have-
clerk?
Who do you have that made the motion, city clerk? Or you have someone on your team doing that for you?
So while he's looking at that, so we will bring it back in June.
Yeah, well, and if it's ready in June, but I'd like to not tie a date to it. You may need more time to get additional feedback from commissioners and city staff. And so why don't we just withdraw it and expect it to come back when it's ready? Especially since there's not an urgency to it.
Yeah. Thank
So-
you. Sorry.
All right,
This was helpful, though.
Good.
Yes,
I'm glad.
so, all right, so I need a withdrawal of that motion, and then that will come back to us at a later date.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
I think that was.
All right, so commissioners, that will take us to our last item, and then we'll go into executive session. And this is a motion for text amendments. These are corrections to text amendments for lot width reductions. Can I get a motion?
Support.
All right, moved and supported. All of us have a copy of the red line changes. We have Ms. Turkelson here to tell us about this.
Good morning, Mayor, Commission, City Manager. So the item before you is just a cleanup item of an ordinance that you adopted last month. Unfortunately, after the adoption and upon the millionth read of the ordinance, we realized that there was some duplicative text that's noted in the red line version that is in front of you. So that should be stricken, and as a result of that additional text, it threw off the section references. So my apologies, we're human. I think it's also worth noting that none of the changes that are before you today impair the intent of what you had adopted. And then lastly, I just wanted to note that staff has also begun working kind of on a companion item to evaluate whether some additional ordinance amendments are needed relative to the lot area requirements, and perhaps we embark upon a similar effort to provide that flexibility to support that incremental infill of single and two-family residential, pardon me. So that would be an item that we would bring before you in the future.
Great.
So thank you for your patience and consideration.
Yeah, thank you. All right, commissioners, any questions or comments? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, commissioners, now I need a motion to go into executive session for pending litigation. Can I get a motion?
I'll move it.
Support.
All right, moved in support. This is a voice vote, so I'll start down here. Commissioner Moody?
Yes.
Commissioner Jones?
I'll go.
Yes, thank you. Commissioner Lanier?
Aye.
Commissioner Repart?
Yes.
Commissioner Isasi?
Yes.
And I am a yes. So we're gonna, why don't we take a 2-minute break if you need to get some coffee or use the restroom, and then we'll be in the law library.